During those few moments, I was in another dimension. I saw an endless white plain in all directions, and I heard a deep, rich melody that sounded like a synthesizer. As I pondered the music later, it was very similar to a song called 1984 that opens Van Halen's 1984 album. The song is an instrumental that is just over a minute long, and it definitely has the same uplifting, rich, heavenly sound that I heard while out of my body. Hello, and welcome to WordWise. I'm your host, Kit, and today I'm going to discuss the letters from prison that Chad Daybell has been writing. A big thank you to everyone who asked if I would cover this, including Kat, who actually emailed me. I wasn't sure I would, but y'all convinced me to give it a shot. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, let's back up a minute. A couple of weeks ago, a website appeared. It contains letters purportedly written by Chad Daybell, who is on death row in Idaho for his involvement in the deaths of Tammy Daybell, J.J. Vallow, and Tylee Ryan. 6 letters have been posted at the time of this recording, and Chad's daughter Emma has confirmed to the U.S. Sun that she is posting the letters on her father's behalf. She's also apparently running his Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook accounts. Why he needs an Instagram, I don't know. I'm dead certain he doesn't have a camera. Before I heard that Emma had come forward, my main question was whether or not someone had used AI to write these. As you may or may not know, I am against the use of generative AI in all circumstances for all reasons. I refuse to use it. None of my videos are made with it. The time it might save me absolutely cannot justify the devastating environmental impact. And if you aren't aware of the toll the use of AI is taking on the planet, I encourage you to do some research so you can understand what you're contributing to. It's terrifying. And maybe I jumped to thinking of AI because I'm still reflecting on Rex and Adam's attempt to interview an AI version of Alex Cox on their podcast. According to Gosha, most of the AI detecting tools on the market are dreadfully inaccurate, so I decided to use an old tool instead. Word has a feature called Editor that will run certain calculations on a document, and I gave it a 25-page sample of Chad's writing that I took from his old website and compared Word's stats on that document to the stats it came up with on these letters, which I copied and pasted from the website. Word calculated how many words per sentence Chad uses, how many sentences per paragraph, what reading level a document is, all that kind of stuff. And the results were pretty conclusive that Chad wrote these. I don't know how accurately AI mimics those features, but I do feel fairly confident that Emma didn't write these while pretending to be Chad. In order to make sure the similarities I was seeing were significant, I ran the same calculations on several documents I'd written, which was interesting. If you want to play around with this feature on Word, go to the Review tab, hit Editor on the left side of the screen, and then click on Document Stats on the right. So we have Emma's assurance that these were really written by Chad. We have surface-level statistical similarities between these letters and a known sample of Chad's writing. There are 3 other aspects of these letters that make me believe they're authentic. First, I went through them and couldn't find a single factual inaccuracy. Now, that doesn't include things we know Chad lies about. I didn't count all the lies he tells about Tammy's health. What I mean is, I couldn't find anything inaccurate that would suggest forgery to me, or hallucinations. The author didn't accidentally call Chad's daughters Lena and Emily, or say Chad grew up in Springfield instead of Springville. No red flags there. Second, I didn't find an absence of detail. Whoever wrote these letters knows a lot about Chad's life. Third, and finally, I looked at the content. Are these letters the kinds of things Chad writes about? Is there an overlap between the content of these letters and his previous website or his autobiography? Strong yes. I'll point out passages and elements that scream Chad as we go through them. Nothing in the content of these letters makes me think Chad couldn't or wouldn't have written them. In fact, the About the Author page is topped by a photo of a young Chad sitting at a typewriter, a photo I'd never seen before, and a reverse image search turned up nothing. But in spite of that, something does feel off here. Something doesn't sound quite right, and I can't put my finger on what it is yet, but there's something going on. My guess is that Chad wrote these and Emma ran them through an AI editor. Why? Maybe she was just checking for typos, or maybe she didn't want to proofread them herself. Or maybe it wasn't AI at all, and Chad edited them, something he never appeared to do with his fiction. I seem to recall that Tammy did all the proofreading at their publishing company. Maybe Emma took over and she has a heavier hand than Tammy did. She's a teacher, so she might have strong stylistic preferences. All I know is that something sounds different between his older writing and this. Alright, now that we've confirmed authorship to the best of our ability, let's bite into the meat of the actual letters. Each letter has 3 parts: the letter itself, bookshelf, and musical notes. Chad provides no explanation for the bookshelf sections, which contain comments about a book or two that he enjoyed. Musical notes is basically the same with singers and bands, but he's going to try to explain that in his first letter. None of the letters are really letters either. They aren't addressed to anyone, and he doesn't sign them, so they aren't letters in the sense we normally think of them. Frankly, that's very Chad. He isn't focused on the person he's writing to. He's focused on himself.
Hello, my friends. This is Chad Daybell, writing to you from my cell at Idaho's maximum security institution. This is the first of several letters I will send. I want to thank everyone who sent me cards and letters while I've been incarcerated. Your kind words of support really helped me. I cherished each one.
Bold of Chad to call me his friend. I'm enjoying how inappropriately cheerful he sounds. Hi, it's Chad from Death Row. Even though he doesn't tell us to whom he's writing, he seems to have assumed they're friends. I also think he's fronting and trying to make himself look less reviled than he is by immediately bringing up how many people believe in him enough to send him letters in jail.
I arrived here at the prison in June 2024, and I suppose you could say I've settled in. As for Death Row itself, I won't be sharing details about my daily schedule or information about my fellow inmates. As the newest arrival on Death Row, it isn't my place to talk about such things. It really is a different world in here, but I'm surviving, and I spend a lot of time working on my upcoming appeals.
This is the second paragraph, and things have already gotten weird. I don't know if the prison is preventing him from sharing details about his daily schedule, but that's my first guess. They tend to be pretty tight-lipped about that kind of thing for security reasons. I wouldn't be surprised if people had written to him to try to find out about other inmates, but I am surprised by this note about how what's preventing him from discussing those inmates is being the lowest man in the hierarchy. He almost seems to be emphasizing his last place position, which is curious because Chad is so concerned with his image. I don't know what to make of this other than as an indication that he's been put in his place by the other inmates. I think that partly because he's too arrogant to admit such a thing without feeling forced, and partly because this phrasing is just subtle enough that it's beyond Chad's ability to invent. He has neither the creativity nor the sensibility. I express my gratitude to each of you who have been a part of my life. While I was in the Fremont County Jail, I spent thousands of hours in an isolation cell. I wasn't allowed to have a clock, and it often felt like time stood still. During those challenging days, I would reflect on my life, working forward from childhood to more recent years. As memories came to me, I would write down the names of the people who had been positive influences in my life. I felt strengthened as I remembered my extended family members, neighbors, co-workers, school classmates, business associates, church members, and friends I have been privileged to know. You have all enriched my life in so many ways. There's no way this happened. Chad Daybell didn't spend his time in jail reflecting on his life and mentally composing thank you notes. That's not who he is. What he's revealing here is exactly who he's writing to. People who know him. He's not trying to win over the public at large. He's writing very specifically to people he's known in the past. And I think that's really interesting. He's not writing to me. He's writing to Red Vines, who went to high school with him and attended seminary with him for 4 years. And he's written this very transparent declaration of how amazing those people are. He's kissing up to them so hard.
I am using this method to share my story because I want you to receive it uncensored and unfiltered, directly from me. I am aware of how I have been portrayed in the media. Frankly, those portrayals of me are unrecognizable. I am not the man the media has created. I am not a cult member who should be feared. I am not a conspirator or a killer. I never have been. I am a father, a grandfather, a husband, a son, a brother, and a friend with a firm faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ.
And now we see why he's kissing up so hard. Chad knows that the media has destroyed his reputation. He knows he has no chance of winning most of us back. No one who watched that trial thinks he's innocent. But manipulative people are often very good at identifying people who can be manipulated. And Chad has realized that the people he's most likely to succeed in winning over are the people who knew him before his crimes. He conned them into believing he was gentle and humble and so spiritual for decades. Now he's directly telling them, I'm not the person the prosecutors portrayed. You know the real me. I'm a family man who loves Jesus.
I have recently been able to have a few in-person visits with several of my family members, and those have been wonderful. I will always be grateful for the unconditional love and support these family members have given me. When people find out that my relatives have visited me, they usually ask them, "How has he changed?" My relatives give the same response. He hasn't changed. He's the same Chad we always knew. People are surprised by that answer after hearing a different story for so long. I am still the quiet, gentle person you all know. I have always been a peacemaker, even now in prison. I have never caused anyone's death and never conspired to commit such acts against anyone. I share in your sadness, pain, and grief over the deaths of Tammy, Tylee, and JJ. I don't have all the answers even now, but I'm grateful a more complete story will be shared during my appeals process.
Oh, are you mourning with all who mourn, Chad? He doubles down on the family man image, and then reassures his former acquaintances that he's exactly the person they thought he was, which is so manipulative. So many people who find out that someone they know or used to know did something terrible are consumed by the questions, why? Are they not who I thought they were? Did I miss something? Chad is manipulating his readers by offering to answer that question and assuage people's uncertainty. He's saying, no, you don't have to worry about that. I'm exactly who you thought I was. Everyone is precisely who they appear to be, and you never have to doubt your perceptions or the intentions of others. The world is a safe place, and your judgments are sound. We all want to believe that, and Chad is trying to draw us in by telling us that our fantasies are real.
During my court trial, I followed my attorney's advice to sit quietly, not smile, and not show any emotion as evidence was presented. I know that is standard protocol for defendants in the courtroom, but I realize now that it made me appear to be cold and uncaring, which is the opposite of who I am. I assure you, my heart was breaking many times throughout the trial, and there were moments when I couldn't hold back the tears, especially as I saw and heard family members suffering the same feelings of anguish that I was experiencing.
Yeah, I remember Chad pretending to cry in court. Is anyone else noticing a trend of people who've been convicted swearing they aren't really cold and emotionless and only pretending to cry by blaming their lawyers? Chandler Halderson did the same thing when he was sentenced in the deaths of both of his parents. All they found of his mom were her legs, But he says he only looked so bored in court when photos of said legs were projected onto a wall because his lawyer told him not to show emotions. Sure, Chandler. Keep telling yourself that. A key purpose of these letters is to share with you what I had hoped would have been explained in court. I will strive to make each letter informative and worth your time. I fully realize many people will never change their negative opinion of me. In this age of social media, podcasts, and the merging of the mainstream media with law enforcement, very few defendants are portrayed in a positive way. All I can hope for is that these letters can begin to generate feelings of healing, reconciliation, and understanding. Thanks again, my friends, for the many ways you have helped and inspired me throughout my life. So he's writing these letters to tell us the story that should have been told during the trial, and to express the emotion that he should have expressed during the trial. He wants a do-over in the court of public opinion. And in the court of law, I gather, based on his mention of his appeal. I think he goes too far in his desire to verbalize the value proposition of these letters. I will strive to make each letter informative and worth your time is flat out funny. He also tells a very obvious lie here, that he knows most people will never change their minds, that he's not even trying for that. He just wants to generate feelings of healing. Ignoring the fact that healing isn't an emotion, this is deeply disingenuous. How is it that more lies are going to help people heal? I have to point out two remarkable things from the sentence in the middle of that final long paragraph. In this age of social media, podcasts, and the merging of the mainstream media with law enforcement, very few defendants are portrayed in a positive way. First, Chad isn't a defendant. He's a convict. Second, what is the merging of the mainstream media with law enforcement? Is he talking about Live PD? Dateline? Is this some kind of conspiracy theory? Or is he upset about the video footage from his arrest? I'm clueless. What is clear from this paragraph is that he feels that the media surrounding his case somehow screwed it up. After the letter itself is the section titled Bookshelf. Chad begins with a paragraph about how he built a bookshelf in shop class back in high school, and his family still has it. Our family's favorite books have resided on those shelves throughout the years, and I'm eager to share the significance of those books in upcoming letters. That's not really an explanation of why he included this section, but he goes on to discuss how much he loved Dwayne Crowther's Life Everlasting when he first read it as a teenager. I've read Life Everlasting. I don't think Chad mentions it here because of random chance. Crowther is a pretty well-known LDS author, and he's written a lot about end times and the afterlife. But he's also very straight-laced. I think that Chad mentions him here almost as an example of how someone can be into doomsday prophecies and also be an upstanding member of the church. More manipulation. Then there's a section titled Musical Notes. Chad writes, I love all kinds of music, and in my upcoming letters, I will sometimes mention songs that have been the soundtrack to my life. Rather than disrupting the flow of the letter by discussing a song's importance to me at that point, I will include these musical notes afterward to give added meaning and depth. Except that he didn't mention any music in this letter, so there's no need for this section. In spite of that, he goes on to tell a ridiculous story about how he was bereft of all music in his life while he was in jail, until he was given a portable radio that he could take outside during recreation in the Spartan ball court, and if he stood in a certain spot and held the radio at a certain angle, he was able to listen to Christian pop. It's obviously a story designed to demonstrate how faithful and pitiable he is by using this image of him huddled in a cement cube, desperately clinging to songs about Jesus to save him from despair. At first, I listened to the other two stations more often, but as I became more familiar with the K-Love songs and their emphasis on Jesus and uplifting topics, I came to rely on those songs to boost my morale. One song that stood out to me was I'm So Blessed by the group Cain. It has a catchy beat, and the lyrics include the phrase, on my best day, I'm a child of God. On my worst day, I'm a child of God. Those were definitely some of my worst days, but the song helped me remember that the Lord was with me at all times, especially when the going got tough. So if you're having a hard day, click on the link, and hopefully the song helps lift your spirits. He includes a link to the audio, or rather Emma does, and that's the end of the letter. There isn't even a signature. What we've learned from the first letter is that Chad is trying to convince the people who knew him before his crimes that he's innocent, and that he's using his bookshelf and musical notes sections of the letters to manipulate the readers under the guise of discussing his favorite media. I'm also suspicious that he might be using them to pad the letters out, because they're not very long. Thus ends the first letter. Letter 2 is focused on Tammy. It's strange to read this overly effusive, adoring letter after watching John Pryor work so hard to smear Tammy in court. Chad begins like this. This letter is devoted to Tammy. I loved her, and I still do. She was my life partner and the mother of our 5 amazing children. We built a wonderful family together. We were married for nearly 30 years, and I always sought to keep her safe and protected. She was the anchor of my life, and I never considered harming her. I suppose I could argue over whether saying that he's never considered harming her is different than saying he didn't harm her, but that's splitting hairs. He immediately follows this up with lies about Tammy's health. Tammy had increasingly severe health issues in the final months of her life, but very few people knew about them. She was an intensely private person who rarely shared personal details with others, much less that her health was suffering. She would put on a brave smile in public and act as if nothing was bothering her. But even those of us who knew about her health struggles never expected her to pass away so suddenly, and her death has somewhat overshadowed the remarkable woman she was. Her death has overshadowed her life, that much is true, but none of the rest of this is. As Tammy's coworkers and family testified in court, Tammy wasn't an intensely private person who refused to share her life with others. I'm sure she put on a brave smile in public on occasions, as we all do, but Chad wants us to believe that the people she was close to had no idea what was really going on in her life. And that's a crocky you-know-what. It's also interesting to me that this is the second paragraph in the letter. Chad is going to describe his relationship with Tammy chronologically as we go forward, so you'd expect this discussion of the final months of her life would come later, but Chad seems to want to put his defense to killing her front and center. I want you to get to know the living, vibrant, beautiful Tammy who blessed so many people with her talents and unique traits. She was strong, yet so delicate. We were united in our parenting efforts, our religious beliefs, and in the publishing company we operated together for 15 years. She radiated goodness and charisma, generating a positive impact on everyone around her. She was very kind and loving, but especially to children and animals. She was always on the lookout for the underdog who might need a boost in life. We know that Chad is writing these letters primarily to the people he knew before his crimes. Presumably, those people knew Tammy also, so I think this paragraph is intended as a refresher on Chad and Tammy's life together. It's ironic that Chad is writing all these nice things about her now, when he called her lazy during her actual funeral. If he talked about her more like this after her death, he might have gotten away with it. Chad then summarizes his and Tammy's history together, starting with plugging the fact that he was a missionary to New Jersey. He tells the same story of seeing her picture in his brother's yearbook and feeling a jolt of electricity, but he leaves out the part about the woman who told him he would marry a blonde. Nor does he discuss how God put a veil of spiritual blindness between them so that they wouldn't recognize each other as their future partners too soon. I guess that was too woo-woo for his intended audience. He tells the story of how they officially met at a young singles event and played volleyball, And he uses exactly the same language to describe the event that he used in Living on the Edge of Heaven. I'm betting he has a copy of his autobiography in his cell. Then he tells a story about a little prank he played on Tammy. After explaining that he and Tammy both loved music, he writes, "As Christmas approached, I told Tammy I had gotten her a gift she would love. But I had discovered she was a bit of a prankster, and I had become her new favorite target. So I decided to give her a little payback. I had been given a pair of really nice writing pens in a small rectangular box. On Christmas Day, I handed her the wrapped box, and she eagerly opened it. I kept a straight face as she pretended to be happy about the 2 pens. I said, 'I thought you could use them at work. They're really nice.' She nodded and said, 'Thank you. I love them.' She started to put the box aside when I said, 'Maybe you should look underneath the pens.' She removed the pens to find 2 front-row tickets to an upcoming Oingo Boingo concert. She let out a relieved laugh, then bowled me over, showering me with hugs and kisses." According to Chad's autobiography, he was a fan of pranks long before he met Tammy. At least this prank wasn't mean-spirited. Chad describes how they got married and had kids, and how Tammy got the strongest confirmation of her life when she prayed about Chad's desire to start his own publishing company. That's definitely a phrase he used in his autobiography. It's irritating to me that he spends so much time on the publishing company and so little on Tammy's interests and activities. But he does at least admit how much she did for Spring Creek Books. He only ever describes her in the context of himself, though. It's like she didn't even exist when he wasn't in the room with her. We won several awards from bookseller organizations, and Tammy deserved the credit. She was the backbone of the company, and she made great things happen through her promotional ideas and internet marketing. Tammy's mom, Phyllis, joined the company as our lead salesperson, and the 2 of them were a dynamic duo in selling books. He says he's going to stop there and will continue his narrative in the next letter, which makes no sense to me because it's not like he has to rush to make the post. What does he have to do other than write these letters? Also, he didn't stop there. He included both bookshelf and musical notes sections. Under bookshelf, he describes how he published a book called A Lion and a Lamb about 2 LDS missionaries. I can't swear to this because I don't remember where I read it, but I think A Lion and a Lamb was Spring Creek's best-selling title, and it was made into a movie. Chad includes a link at the bottom of this section that leads you to the Amazon page for the book, so you can buy it right now. And that obviously makes one wonder, is Chad still making money off Spring Creek's titles? Spring Creek is listed as the publisher on Amazon's webpage. Suzanne Freeman has been unable to get back the legal rights to the books she published with Chad, and I was under the impression that Spring Creek had been shut down. But someone's getting the revenue for these books. I assume that's one motivation for Chad to talk about the book here. Another is probably to make people recall when he contributed something positive to his community. And he never misses an opportunity to remind people that he was LDS. Under musical notes, Chad discusses how much he and Tammy loved the band Keen and how all his children are musical too. He links to Tammy's favorite Keen song, Spiraling. I assume that Emma added these links when she created the site because I'm pretty sure Chad can't access YouTube from prison. Thus ends the second letter. The third letter opens with Chad and Tammy's move to Rexburg, Idaho. He gives no explanation for why they moved to Rexburg, just says that everyone loved it there, especially Tammy, who amassed a collection of pets and gardens. Chad writes, "After moving to Idaho, Tammy and I stayed busy running our publishing company. I was the president and editor-in-chief, while she was the vice president and chief financial officer. I was also making good money writing a weekly online column, along with receiving royalties on my published books. We felt blessed. So Tammy didn't need to work beyond her company duties, but several years earlier in Springville, she had taken a part-time position as the computer lab teacher at our children's elementary school. She loved working with the students, and the job was very rewarding to her." I think this online column Chad was writing that he refers to was his Avow subscription site. It's interesting that Chad stresses that they had no financial pressures, that Tammy only took the teaching position because she wanted to. He glosses over how, after the move to Idaho, they had to declare bankruptcy, and Tammy took the full-time teaching job because Spring Creek Books wasn't supporting either one of them. I'm getting the sense that these letters are designed to address specific points related to Chad's convictions. I wouldn't be surprised if he made a list of the things people find the most deleterious to his claims of innocence and then set out to address each one individually. He was convicted of insurance fraud in addition to the deaths, so this might be his way of pushing back on the idea that he needed money. Next, he bolsters his claim that Tammy died of natural causes by giving us a long, detailed narrative about her sudden health decline in 2019. The only people who attested to this were Chad and Emma. Maybe Garth, I don't recall. But her friends in her clogging and calisthenics classes certainly didn't think she was struggling with her health. Chad claims there were 4 physical issues that foreshadowed Tammy's sudden death, but then he lists 7. Coughing fits, lengthy colds, fatigue, swollen joints, bloating in her abdomen, varicose veins, and fainting spells. Except for the fainting, this all sounds like it could have been perimenopause to me, but I'm not a doctor. Chad tells a story about how he found Tammy crying because her pants didn't fit, and when they went to buy replacements, she had to go up 2 sizes. Ironically, Chad loves to fat shame people. That summer, we went to the LDS temple, and during one of the ceremonies, Tammy fainted, collapsed backwards, and then threw up all over the front of her dress. She was very embarrassed as the temple's medical team rushed into the room to care for her. If this happened, there would be a record. There would be people who could attest to it. I have a rare condition called confusional hemiplegic migraine. I get really dizzy and disoriented, the right side of my body goes weak, and I struggle to speak, usually for 5 to 10 minutes, when one of these migraines first comes on. Before I got properly diagnosed, I developed one of these migraines while at the orchestra, and as it happened, the orchestra had just implemented a new policy where they have EMS on site during concerts. I was the first person they'd ever gotten to call on-site EMS for, and the paramedic was very excited to have something to do. Ended up telling me I'd probably just strained too hard on the toilet during intermission. Somewhere, there is a record of that interaction. I remember the paramedic filling out a form. If Tammy really got sick at the temple and was attended to by the medical team, there's paperwork on that. And yet, we didn't hear anything about it at Chad's trial. I don't think we heard anything about varicose veins or swollen joints either. But Tammy's failing health is a huge point of importance in Chad's defense, and that's why we're getting an entire letter about it. He recounts multiple instances of Tammy fainting that we never heard about in court. Then he says that the night before she died, she had a coughing fit and threw up. But he'll talk about the morning he found her in a later letter. As in the last letter, why the delay? Just get to the point, Chad. Tammy was a true angel on earth, and I know she is still watching over our family. My children and I have felt her presence many times since her death. We sense she is particularly interested in her precious grandchildren. We believe families can be together forever in heaven, and although she has moved on ahead of us, we know we will be reunited with her someday. This is a somewhat more socially acceptable form of Laurie's, Tammy visits me in spirit form in my prison cell. But it's basically the same thing. Chad then uses the bookshelf section to promote his own book, Chasing Paradise. It's starting to look like at least one motive for writing these letters is to try to drum up book sales. Chad has no shame. The musical notes section is barely about music. He starts by saying how much his family loved the movie Napoleon Dynamite, and how he and Tammy visited sites where the movie was filmed. Then he debates whether the spirit of Idaho is better represented by the B-52 song Private Idaho, or Tim McGraw's Where the Green Grass Grows. I'm not sure what any of this has to do with anything, and I'm not convinced Chad does either. He says randomly, "I just remembered a detail. It snows 9 months of the year in Idaho." You're still in Idaho, dude. Does your room not have a window? Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Thus ends the third letter. Instead of recounting what happened the morning Tammy died, Chad's focus in the fourth letter is on his LDS mission. This seems rather obviously avoidant, and it makes me wonder if Chad is ever actually going to tell us what happened, or if these letters are just intended to remind people what a nice, humble guy he is. I'm going to skip most of the mission-related content because we heard about it at length in his autobiography and in Doug's Dilemma, the first 50 pages of which are ripped off from his mission. Chad is probably reiterating well-known information because he very much wants to remind everyone what a good, faithful Mormon he is. So he describes how badly he was treated by the people of New Jersey, how they threw bottles and apples at him, and how his mission companion told him to man up and have faith in Jesus. This led to Chad praying and being granted a vision of the first vision. Joseph Smith, the founder of the LDS Church, had a vision in which God and Jesus appeared and spoke to him. Chad claims that he also experienced that vision, which puts him one step removed from being Joseph Smith. It's the quintessential humble brag. I was having a moment of lack of faith, and my mission companion stuck his finger in my chest and barked at me, and because of that I prayed and I was granted a vision. I'm so humble. Why did I share that experience with you? Because from that day on, I have been completely devoted to the LDS Church. I have served in many different callings, including being part of 4 different bishoprics. He's definitely pulling out his LDS resume here. He describes his involvement in church disciplinary councils and how they usually ended with the person being disciplined feeling relieved and reconciled with Jesus. He's reminding people how disciplinary councils usually go so he can contrast that with how he's been treated. With that background, it is true I am currently excommunicated from the LDS Church. Sadly, I didn't receive an opportunity to have a compassionate church leader hear my side of the story. I would have happily welcomed a visit from my church leaders during my 4 years in the Fremont County Jail, but no one ever came. Instead, I learned I had been excommunicated through the mail, more than a month after the disciplinary council had taken place. He wants us to see him as a victim. Poor Chad didn't get a visit from his bishop while in jail. Poor Chad didn't even get to speak at his disciplinary council meeting. Poor Chad had no chance to avoid excommunication. The fact that the church excommunicated him is one of those points on which he feels he needs to defend himself, because he knows that most of the people he's trying to win over are still members of the church. Also, I'm sure Chad could have requested a visit from his bishop. My impression is that even jails and prisons are pretty open to inmates receiving religious counseling, probably because the inmates tend to behave better afterward. What did he do in order to initiate a visit? Anything? Nothing? At the jail, the deputies would put any mail addressed to me in a big manila envelope, which was held until my attorney's next visit. He and I would then sort through the mail together. When he visited me in September 2020, we emptied the manila envelope, and among the letters were 2 envelopes from my LDS Church stake president, my local leader. I'd had a good relationship with him over the years, and I initially expected these envelopes to contain letters of kindness, support, and encouragement. However, I opened the first envelope and read a printed form letter informing me a disciplinary council would be held regarding my church membership. It felt like an arrow had pierced my heart. I took a deep breath and opened the second envelope. This letter said the council had been held, and I had been excommunicated for apostasy. The letter stated I had 30 days to appeal the decision, but by that time the deadline had already passed, since the jail had been holding my mail. This is a bald-faced lie. As soon as I read it, I thought, that makes no sense. Why would they hold his mail until his lawyer was present? His lawyer doesn't want to sort his mail with him? I could just imagine him and John Pryor sitting there, and John being like, while Chad's going, I think this one is junk mail. Oh, and this is about my car warranty. Anyway, I looked it up. The First Amendment prevents jails and prisons from interfering too much with mail. And here's Idaho's official policy for jail inmates. Incoming mail that presents no procedural problems will be processed and delivered within 24 hours of receipt, Monday through Friday, excluding legal holidays. Chad's lying that he wasn't informed of the disciplinary council and that he wasn't able to appeal his excommunication because the deadline had already passed. I don't know what the real reason is that Chad didn't take action. Maybe just because he knew he had no defense, but he's lying about the mail issue. And since we're talking about the First Amendment, my guess would be that these letters are protected by it as well. I keep hearing people ask how it's legal for him to put these out, and the answer seems to be, well, it's not illegal. He's not making money off the letters or the websites, not even ad revenue. If people are determined to have the website taken down, they may have to resort to social pressure. I have still never found out what evidence was presented in the disciplinary council, or who testified against me. The church scriptures known as the Doctrine and Covenants explains excommunication procedures in depth. Section 102, verse 18 reads, "In all cases the accuser and the accused shall have a privilege of speaking for themselves before the council." That obviously didn't happen in my situation. I would love to know what transpired in the meeting, but the church has resisted my efforts to obtain the records. What do you want to bet what the church is resisting, if it's resisting anything at all, is telling Chad who testified against him? I don't know if he's entitled to that information or not, but I'm betting it's something he really wants to know. Chad is focusing on the fact that he wasn't allowed to defend himself, at least not in person, which wasn't the church's fault because Chad couldn't be at the meeting because he was in jail. And maybe that does go against church policy, but he doesn't want to address the reasons he was excommunicated. But they didn't follow policy. That doesn't mean the church wasn't justified. All they would have had to do to get evidence of his apostasy was listen to his sister-in-law or pay for his private avow content. He's avoiding discussing his heretical teaching. I readily admit I have many flaws and weaknesses that I am striving to overcome, but I am not guilty of the great sins attributed to me. The thought of associating with apostate groups or teaching false doctrine is absurd to me. Please at least let me know the specific doctrines I was supposedly teaching. Who are my accusers? When and where did I say these things? This is evidence to me that he's realized he can only try to win back the support of people who didn't watch the trial, because there was so much evidence of the weird things he was teaching. The light and dark souls ranking system is nowhere in LDS theology. Those weird diagrams Zulema showed everyone, those all come from Chad. Well, okay, more likely from some unknown third party that Chad ripped off, but they certainly didn't come from the LDS Church. Chad's claiming he has no idea what's going on here, which is very bold. But the narrative he's trying to promote is that he's been railroaded and denied the right to defend himself. This is also a classic case of someone admitting to something small, in his case, having many flaws and weaknesses, because he's so humble, in order to suggest that if he were guilty, this pattern of admitting his failures would extend to admitting his crimes. That's an entirely false premise. So for these reasons, I still consider myself an active member of the LDS Church. My excommunication process didn't follow scriptural guidelines, and apparently no effort was made to verify I had received the notification letters. At the very least, I deserved a chance to talk to a church leader in person and answer any accusations of misconduct. I have never felt a decrease in my priesthood power, or a loss of the influence of the Holy Ghost. I have actually felt an increase in these areas, which has been a great comfort and blessing as I deal with my current circumstances. I fully support the LDS Church's first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles. I follow their teachings, and I am working out my own salvation through the power and grace of the atonement of Jesus Christ, my Savior. What do you mean you still consider yourself an active member? You don't get to determine that. He says he sustains the prophet and the quorum of the 12, but his refusal to accept that the church has excommunicated him contradicts that. He can say that he's still a Christian and still has faith, but he can't claim membership in an organization that has given him the boot. This claim that his priesthood powers have actually increased is kind of wild. He's almost suggesting that, regardless of the church's position, Jesus still considers him a member in good standing. It reminds me a great deal of Visions of Glory, of this idea that there is a higher authority operating to elevate a small elite group within the church. He ends by telling us that Elder Hansen, the mission companion who helped solidify Chad's faith, attended Tammy's funeral. That was very nice of Elder Hansen, but I don't see how it's evidence that Chad is innocent. Under Bookshelf, Chad goes on for a bit about how most of his heroes are sports figures. This was the moment I knew these letters came from Chad Daybell, because only a truly dedicated forger would bother to include pointless mentions of Chad's favorite sports figures. Chad, however, never misses an opportunity to bring up Steve Young. Here, it doesn't even make sense. He gives us a list of his favorite athletes, and then says, "But of course, Joseph Smith is my biggest hero, after Jesus." Unsurprisingly, he dives right into how Joseph Smith was also persecuted by the criminal justice system, just like Chad. Because, humility. Persecution intensified against him and his family, and it never let up the rest of his life. Supposed friends repeatedly betrayed him, and he endured dozens of arrests on false charges, spending many months in dark, damp, squalid jails. Yet somehow he maintained a positive attitude and accomplished incredible feats. He translated the Book of Mormon from ancient records and founded the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He revealed many profound eternal truths and designed new cities, yet made time to raise a good family and care for his church members. It's curious that Chad focuses on Smith's incredible feats. I wonder if Chad is trying to imply that he will also do amazing things while incarcerated. He finally gets around to mentioning a book. It's the first volume of Saints, a history of the LDS Church put out by the church. A very safe recommendation as far as proving he's a mainstream believer. Under musical notes, he tells another story from his mission. He says he and Elder Hansen were allowed to attend an LDS wedding as long as they got a ride to Jersey City, and he was very excited because he was going to get a glimpse of the Twin Towers. That's more evidence that Chad really wrote these. No document written by Chad Daybell is complete without a Twin Towers reference. Chad and Elder Hansen were given a ride to the wedding by two church members who happened to drive a sports car, and while they were driving, a Whitney Houston song came on. So emotional. The woman who was giving Chad a ride turned up the song and began singing along. The woman began dancing happily in her seat and started singing along animatedly. It was quite a show. Then, when she reached the chorus, a lasting memory was imprinted into my brain. "I get so emotional, baby, every time I think of you. I get so emotional, baby. Ain't it shocking what love can do?" At that moment, I caught a good glimpse of the tops of some Manhattan skyscrapers, including the Empire State Building. Suddenly, I was the one getting so emotional. It was the equivalent of a spiritual experience as we entered Jersey City, where I would be transferred a couple of months later. In this city, I would later meet amazing people and witness literal healing miracles. But in that instant, I just basked in the wonderful realization that it was possible to have fun, joyful experiences on a mission and throughout our lives. This story raises so many questions. I think Chad was trying to say that he's having meaningful experiences even in prison, but I might be giving him too much credit. It feels like some kind of context for this story is missing. Chad caught a ride to a wedding, and he got emotional at the sight of the Empire State Building, and a woman in the car was singing along to a Whitney song, and Chad had the equivalent of a spiritual experience. Interesting that he uses the word equivalent instead of saying he had an actual spiritual experience, although I'm not sure what the nature of the experience would have been other than spiritual. Why was he so emotional at the sight of the Empire State Building? Was he in awe? He was forbidden to enter New York City as a missionary, although he visited afterward with his parents, and he repeatedly described it as evil in his novels before fictionally destroying it. So I have a hard time believing that he felt like overwhelming awe at the sight of it. He just fails to explain the nature of this experience in any meaningful way. Also, let's talk about this song for a second. It was a #1 hit from Whitney's second album, which was packed with #1 hits. I Want to Dance with Somebody and Didn't We Almost Have It All were from the same album. The thing I find so odd about So Emotional is that it's a song about a woman who wants to cheat on her partner. Why did Chad, who famously cheated on his spouse, choose to discuss this song in his letter, especially when he's been so deliberate about avoiding mentioning Lori? He writes, "So whether you like the song or not, I consider Whitney Houston's So Emotional to be a sacred hymn. I don't expect it to be included in the new LDS hymn book, but it would certainly add some life to our sacrament meetings." It's a sacred hymn to adultery. There's a lack of explanation and logic in this section that, again, feels authentically Chad Daybell. These are exactly the sorts of screw-ups we saw in his books. He writes an entire letter about how unfair it is that he got excommunicated for apostasy, and then claims that a song about a woman who wants to cheat on her partner is a sacred hymn. Yeah, these letters were definitely written by Chad. Thus ends the 4th letter. I'm eager to explain the events of 2019 to you, but it is very important that I first build a solid foundation of facts. Once these facts and my religious beliefs are properly explained, the events of 2019 will finally make sense. Gee, who does that sound like?
I'm writing it, and I'm going to write out every single thing from beginning to end, so that people can really understand, because you can't understand what happened with Tylee and JJ unless you understand what happened to Tylee in her life. You have to know Tylee's whole story from beginning to end.
If he had a real defense, he'd be writing it at the top of every letter. During my court trial, I was bothered at how simple, well-known beliefs were twisted by the state into sinister, frightening ideas that the state repurposed, claiming these ideas were the catalyst for terrible crimes I did not commit. The state quoted him. Witnesses quoted him. What he's doing here is projecting, because he's the one who twisted simple, well-known beliefs into something sinister. Jesus healing people in the Bible by casting out demons is pretty simple and well known. He performed the laying on of hands in order to heal the afflicted, a concept that exists in pretty much every culture in the world. Chad was the one who turned it into zombies that had to be bound and killed and burned. Time after time, it was the state who defined what my religious beliefs are, not the witness on the stand. As I read through the trial transcript, it is even more obvious on paper. The state repeatedly made inaccurate statements in the form of questions, and the witnesses would get into a rhythm of saying yes or correct many times in a row without hesitation. Hilarious. The witnesses lied because they got so into the rhythm of answering yes to questions that they just kept saying it no matter what they were asked. I've seen that work on 9-year-olds who want to trick each other into insulting themselves. I've never seen it on the stand.
So that's what you came down here to tell me?
Correct.
You never said hi?
Correct.
You still like me, don't you?
Correct. What's that?
The result was a distortion of my beliefs, and I think an incomplete picture, or half story, of what the witnesses actually heard or saw. and unfortunately, my lawyer failed to fill in those blanks on cross-examination. It was an 8-week trial, but somehow only part of the story was told. The rest was just filler. Chit-chat, gossip, a couple witnesses who complained about their jobs. I feel like he's blaming his lawyer here too. And as much as I personally dislike John Pryor, he didn't do a terrible job. He just had nothing to work with. When your client is very obviously guilty, there isn't much you can do other than attack witnesses, which John Pryor did. So I feel it is best to begin by sharing with you my near-death experiences, which have had very significant impacts on my life. There have been 4 times in my life when I've actually died and my spirit has gone into another realm before returning to my body. We're up to 4 now? 4 near-death experiences? That means he's had 2 since he was arrested. He's beaten Spencer's record. Does Chad really think that the way to get out of trouble is to claim yet another NDE? He explains what a near-death experience is and how the body and spirit are separate and the spirit can be removed from the body like a hand being pulled from a glove before being put back in. I found the glove metaphor a little... honestly, I immediately thought of OJ. Maybe I'm the only one, though. I asked Gosha, and he immediately thought of Michael Jackson and the song Smooth Criminal, which also isn't a great association for someone protesting his innocence. Chad recounts his first NDE, the one he had when he went cliff jumping as a teen and his physical skull got stuck on his spirit knees. What's strange about this recounting, other than the spirit knees thing, is that it's taken word for word from his autobiography. And that was one of the red flags for me that this could have been written by AI. However, it wouldn't be the first time Chad repeated himself like this, and given all the other indicators, I'm still inclined to believe he really wrote these. He does include one new detail though, and it's hilarious. During those few moments, I was in another dimension. I saw an endless white plain in all directions, and I heard a deep, rich melody that sounded like a synthesizer. As I pondered the music later, it was very similar to a song called 1984 that opens Van Halen's 1984 album. The song is an instrumental that is just over a minute long, and it definitely has the same uplifting, rich, heavenly sound that I heard while out of my body. Did a plane just pass overhead while I read that? Because it kind of sounds like 1984. Not being a Van Halen fan, I was unfamiliar with this opening. It's new age synthesizer riffs. I don't know if it hasn't aged well or if it always sounded like the soundtrack to an alien abduction, but it's a really funny reference to have included here. Also, not sure Van Halen is the kind of music the church wants teenagers listening to. Here's a still from the music video for a song called Hot for Teacher from the same album. I watched the video. The teacher strips. His description of the aftermath of the NDE, telling his friend he was done for the day, losing vision in one eye and then hitting himself upside the head to fix it, are all the same as his autobiography, verbatim. He ends the letter by promising to retype the story of his second NDE in his next letter. Under bookshelf, he recommends several books, the first of which is Dr. Raymond Moody's Life After Life. I have read this book, and I actually theorized in a previous video that Chad had read it, because he plucked certain details out and included them in Chasing Paradise. It's pretty fun to see that theory confirmed. He also recommends Return from Tomorrow. I have a Visions of Glory video recorded that I haven't edited yet, and I talk a lot about Return from Tomorrow because both Chad and Tom Harrison and/or John Pontius stole key scenes directly from Return from Tomorrow. I'm actually kind of shocked that Chad would be so careless about revealing the sources from which he stole, but Chad is fundamentally shameless. Then he recommends Jeremy Renner's memoir, which I haven't read. I didn't even know it existed, or that Jeremy Renner had a near-death experience when he was run over by that snowplow. I'm glad he survived. He seems like a nice guy. Chad finishes the section like this. These books I've mentioned, as well as movies such as Ghost and The Sixth Sense, have helped to make your near-death experiences and the reality of an afterlife an accepted part of American culture. All right, this is Kit in real time. This is the first time I've noticed that he says, help to make your near-death experiences. Why does he say your? Is that a typo? What would it be a typo for? Our? Ours? Theory. Chad wrote your near-death experiences, almost as a way of emphasizing that they aren't his, that he's just one of millions who've had these, including, possibly, potentially, whoever's reading these letters. I mean, that sounds way too sophisticated for Chad. It's probably a typo. But you never know. It seems like he wanted to discuss these particular books in order to try to convince the reader that NDEs are common and it's totally normal to believe you've had 4 of them. This goal seems to have influenced his choice of song under musical notes as well. He includes the lyrics to all 4 verses of the hymn, "Oh My Father." If you want to confuse the YouTube algorithm, go straight from the music video for Van Halen's Hot for Teacher to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing "Oh My Father." I'll link that below too. Quite beautiful. A little bit slow. Anyway, the lyrics to "Oh My Father" were taken from a poem written by Eliza Snow, and they focus on the idea that we had a previous life in heaven with God and his wife. I assume Chad included this song because he didn't know any songs about near-death experiences. Fair enough, I don't either. So he settled for a hymn that confirms that there's a spirit world and we can exist there. It is truly a tender poem, expressing the longing we feel to be embraced again by our heavenly parents. I hope we can follow their example. We are here on earth to build each other up, help each other along, and be a positive influence regardless of our current earthly situation. Money, fame, and power don't matter. Charity, love, and kindness are the keys to joy and happiness in this life and in the world to come. Did he copy that from a church brochure? Because it certainly doesn't sound like Chad. Also, I hope we can follow their example. He's basically saying, be nice to me, okay? Thus ends the 5th letter. So I literally sat down to record this video, went to check something on Chad's new website, and lo and behold, letter number 6 had dropped. So forgive me if my analysis of it is a bit unformed or my sentences are crappy, but I just read it. As promised, the 6th letter discusses his second near-death experience. This is the one he had after he and Tammy were married, when they went on a Daybell family vacation to La Jolla Cove in California. Before he gets to that, though, he discusses his job as a copy editor at the Ogden Standard Examiner. I have no idea why he's talking about this. He's taken the text directly from his autobiography, occasionally rephrasing a sentence or changing a word, but making no edits of any substance. It's interesting to me because he did exactly the same type of editing to his first 4 novels when he republished them on Amazon. I've never recognized someone's editing style before, but it's obvious that these changes were made by the same person who made the changes to his novels. However, none of that has anything to do with anything. The job wasn't relevant to his near-death experiences or to his criminal case. I think he just likes tooting his own horn. He also tells the story of his second NDE exactly the same way he did in Living on the Edge of Heaven. He was at the beach on an outcropping of rock when a giant freak wave crashed down on him, although he's sensible enough to avoid specifying that it was 15 feet high, like he did in Living on the Edge of Heaven. That was a little hard to believe. This is taken from his autobiography almost verbatim. And I know because I did a side-by-side comparison. What I've done here is typed out each version. Any words that were removed from the autobiographies version are in red, and any word added to the version from the letters are in blue. I'm going to put this up on the screen while I read the sections from the letter version. So I'm going to be reading the section with the blue changes. Then my surroundings instantly changed, and I found myself out of my body inside a tunnel of light. It wasn't a bright white light, but more like a yellow heat lamp. It felt like I was wrapped in a warm blanket, and I felt extremely happy. I saw two men in robes standing about 10 feet above me in the tunnel, and I instinctively knew them. One was my grandpa Keith Daybell, and the other was my great-great-grandpa Finity Daybell. They had died before I was born, but it was like reuniting with old friends. Now, the changes here appear to have been made almost entirely in order to fill in information for readers of the letters who didn't read Chad's autobiography. There are a few minor edits too, but the only changes of note are that Grandpa Keith and Finity are now wearing robes, which is in keeping with Dwayne Crowther's depiction of the spirit world. Chad is now certain of who they are instead of kind of iffy, and they're in the tunnel above him. In all the NDE memoirs I've read, I don't think I've ever read one where the tunnel runs up and down. It's almost like Chad was abducted by aliens. And given that I previously said that the Van Halen song from Chad's first NDE sounded like the soundtrack to an alien abduction, that's pretty funny. Maybe Chad's real problem is that he's a multiple abductee. He continues to describe this tunnel shaft to heaven. I levitated up the tunnel to where they were, and the tunnel opened up into a room. They smiled at me, but they seemed to be in a hurry. This is completely new. It's the first time we've ever heard anything about a room, and there's no description of it, including what they're standing on, since it sounds like the room has no floor, just a tunnel shaft. Anyway, none of this should surprise me, because if there's one thing I learned from reading Chad Daybell's fiction, it's that he couldn't care less about scene descriptions, but I still feel like he should have put a little more effort in here. Just to make it make sense, at least. Keith began speaking to me and gesturing with his hands. He mentioned my 5 children and the roles they would play in the future. It was a strange conversation, since Tammy and I only had 1 child at the time. This almost contradicts something Chad wrote in his autobiography. He includes a scene that takes place a few months after the second NDE, in which he receives a vision of all 5 of his children while at the temple. He doesn't outright say this was the first vision of all 5 of them that he'd had, but that's the obvious implication, especially when he writes that it was neat seeing what color hair the kids would have. I'm not sure why it would be neat to see their hair color for a second time. Here, however, he says that Grandpa Keith told him he'd have 5 kids. The only reason I can think of that he'd make this change is if he isn't planning on recounting that part of the story in a future letter. Maybe he wants to skip over the temple vision, so he moved the important information it contained to the second NDE. That doesn't say much for its authenticity. Chad's willingness to retcon his own life for the flimsiest of reasons never ceases to amaze me. Keith also explained the tasks I needed to accomplish in my lifetime. As he talked, I saw snippets of future events on a set of screens in front of me. The rush of images was almost overwhelming. It felt like they were being downloaded into my mind. Keith asked me if I would be willing to fulfill the assignments he had outlined, and I agreed to do so. There are screens in the room? That's certainly a new detail to this narrative. However, it appears several times in Visions of Glory. When Spencer goes to heaven during his 3rd NDE, he discovers screens that, well, he never explains exactly how they work or what they're for, but they seem similar to computer screens that you can learn from. This is also the first time Chad has mentioned images being downloaded into his mind from screens, although he's definitely talked about spiritual downloads from God in the form of promptings before. I think it was in his autobiography. Then we reach the only direct contradiction with the first version of the NDE, and it isn't a huge difference.
Finity didn't speak because he was keeping an eye on my body, which was now tumbling among the rocks. I could also see my body, but I had lost all interest in it. I was too busy enjoying this family reunion. Then I saw Finity give a nod to Keith, who made a motion with his hand. I was suddenly back in my body, which had washed closer to the beach.
In the original version, Chad said Finity was staring at him intently. Here, he's keeping an eye on Chad's body. It's not a dramatic difference, but it's a difference. This idea that Grandpa Keith and Finity are working in tandem like this is also new. Again, I'm not sure this has any real significance. It seems like Chad wanted to flesh out the details a bit, which in his defense is what we've all been asking for years now. He follows up with the same information about how he got cut up on the rocks and had to go to the ER to get stitches. Emma chose not to repost the photo Chad included in his book to demonstrate proof of his stitches, but I have it.
This brief adventure out of my body felt like an urgent business meeting where Grandpa Keith poured information into me, while Finity allowed the meeting to go on just long enough before I would have drowned. It seemed like there should have been an easier way, but I guess they seized the opportunity. Always with the weak humor. I was pretty banged up, so Tammy and I decided to end our trip at that point and head home. On the drive back to Ogden, I told her about what had happened with Keith and Finity. She was very intrigued and started asking many questions. As she did so, the snippet pertaining to each question would play in my mind. I told her about the 5 kids, and she was happy about that. She asked when they would be born, and I explained I hadn't been given any dates, but I had seen we would have 3 kids in Ogden before moving back to Springville. So we estimated we had at least a few more years living in Ogden.
We learned during Chad's trial that he involved his entire family in his spiritual belief system, and he certainly claimed numerous times in his autobiography that Tammy believed in and supported his pretend psychic powers. I think it's more likely she tolerated them and knew better than to contradict him, but that's my guess. But given the context of these letters and what we've read so far, I'm starting to wonder if Chad is going to use Tammy as some kind of spiritual scapegoat. Like, he's trying to use Tammy's faith in him to normalize his narrative about the NDEs and his visions. And it feels really unfair because she's not here to contradict him. Chad saw to that. I'm flashing back to that moment in Lori's pretrial hearing again. The one where she complained that she should be allowed to enter Tylee's police interview into evidence, even though it was hearsay, and Trina K pointed out that you can't kill someone and then demand a hearsay exception because that person isn't around to testify on your behalf. Also, it's pretty easy to say that you knew 3 of your kids were going to be born in Ogden 20 years after the fact. That doesn't prove anything. Once we returned home, most of the snippets were taken from my mind, and even now I only have access to them on a need-to-know basis. Tammy and I wished we'd talked more about it on the trip home and found out more, but we would have one answer soon enough. Little did we know during our trip that Tammy was already pregnant with our 2nd child, and the 3rd one would quickly follow. This sounds exactly like Visions of Glory. I learned so many amazing things during my trip to heaven, but I wasn't allowed to remember them after I returned. I am intrigued, however, by this claim that he can still access them on a need-to-know basis. What constitutes need to know when it comes to visions of the future? Does anyone ever really need to know the future? Or conversely, don't we all need to know about the future all the time? As far as setting yourself up to only make predictions when you feel like it, however, this is pretty brilliant. I can't tell you tomorrow's winning lottery number. God says it's not need to know. But I can tell you that I'm innocent and that when Jesus returns, he's going to smite everyone who didn't believe in me. Next, Chad implies that he had seen his future role as the Springville Cemetery sexton in one of these snippets. I'm not sure why that would be neat to know, spiritually speaking, unless, and this is so stupid, I can't believe even Chad would do it, but the narrative in the letter does suggest that this snippet is the reason he decided to take the job as cemetery sexton. That replaces the explanation he gave in his autobiography, which was that working the newspaper desk job was making Chad fat. He can't actually be that vain, though, can he? Alternately, maybe one of the parts of his life he feels he has to defend is having worked in multiple cemeteries. Maybe he thinks that makes him look creepy. He certainly embraced it when he published One Foot in the Grave, but maybe now it seems morbid in light of the children he buried in his yard. That's the end of the letter section. Under bookshelf, he writes, "The late 1980s and through the 1990s were a unique time, when truths about the spirit world were being revealed from seemingly every direction. The Berlin Wall came down, and the rapid changes in the Soviet Union brought feelings of hope and peace as we headed toward the new millennium. A spiritual awakening emerged across the world as these life-changing events unfolded." He's claiming that the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall were indicators of increased spiritual truths because he literally believes communism is evil. As further evidence of this great spiritual awakening, he mentions the TV show, Touched by an Angel. Then he provides a list of the more notable spiritual books written by LDS authors during that time. I've read 2 of them, plus the 4 volumes of Beyond the Veil. I will consider the rest my fall semester reading list. Chad writes, "After my second near-death experience, I devoured these books, and many others like them. I felt I had discovered a group of people who could relate to what I'd been through. Each one of these books is excellent, covering heavenly topics from different angles, but with the same general theme of a vast world beyond this one. I later had the privilege of getting to know and work on books with Lee Nelson and Sarah Hines. They are among the best people I've been associated with. Lee is a good-hearted, down-to-earth cowboy, and Sarah is a sweet, kind, thoughtful person. She's a true angel herself." All right, here's another real-time observation. This sentence, "They are among the best people I've been associated with." It's just so transparent that his intention is to try to get some of their good reputations to rub off on him. Lee Nelson was his editor-in-chief when Chad worked at Cedar Fort, but I have never heard him mention Sarah Hines before. I'm actually surprised to hear him lavish praise on Lee Nelson. My impression was they didn't part on great terms after Chad destroyed the sales potential of Chasing Paradise, but maybe I'm mistaken. Or maybe Lee Nelson really is a nice guy and a good Christian who reached out to mend fences after Chad landed in prison. Sarah Hines, as it turns out, published at least 3 books with Chad and Tammy. In fact, it looks like Chad might have poached her from Cedar Fort. I have this fear that one day I'm going to own every single book Spring Creek ever published. I also wonder if Sarah has reached out to Chad since he's been in prison, and that's why the 2 of them are getting such sugary shout-outs. Under musical notes, Chad continues the narrative of his family's move back to Springville for the cemetery sexton job. He says a bit about the man he took over for. I don't remember if he talks about this man in One Foot in the Grave or not, and it's such a terrible book, I don't feel like bothering to figure it out. The biggest change for me was being much more aware of the otherworldly nature of the profession. When I had worked at the cemetery during college, I hadn't had my La Jolla Cove near-death experience yet. Any spirit world interactions at the cemetery had been rare before, but now I could feel that there were plenty of friends hanging out in the cemetery. When I was alone in the cemetery building, I often sensed visitors from the great beyond joining me. Then he repeats 2 of his ghost encounter stories that he's told and retold and aren't remotely interesting or scary to begin with. Sometimes I'd come into work and find that ghosts had turned my planner to the correct day. That's literally one of the stories. All right. more thoughts as they're occurring to me. I'm realizing why he told these terrible stories of his ghost encounters that are just so... I don't even think they constitute ghost encounters. And it's weird that Chad's history is going to work for him here. But, he published One Foot in the Grave, and it actually has very few supernatural events in it. One of the stories he tells is clearly him being electrocuted, and he can't figure it out. Anyway, they're all really, really tame and goofy, and they just scream loser. It kind of works for him here, because anyone who does think, oh, he's a creepy guy who used to work in cemeteries, they're going to hear these stupid stories about ghosts adjusting planner pages and think he's just a schmuck. Like, where's the threat? I mean, that's going to work in his favor. Chad is a threat. But part of what makes him a threat is his ability to hide behind the mask of his own stupidity and his own social lameness. It's hard to believe a guy who would repeatedly tell a story about ghosts turning planner pages could do the kinds of hideous things Chad has done. That's a hard one to wrap your mind around, I think. And I'm sure that's part of what a lot of people who knew him are struggling with. And it works in his favor in this case. Somehow he feels this is a logical lead-in to... A few years ago, Rick Astley released a gospel album titled 50. Yes, the Together Forever singer from the 1980s, who is now well known for the Rickroll internet phenomenon. The album is fun and joyful, especially the song Angels on My Side. Rick sings, I got angels. You got angels. Everybody got their angels on their side. Everything's gonna be all right. I dedicate the song to my cemetery friends from 30 years ago who watched over me, and also to my current friends who I sense are helping me and protecting me now. Yes, Rick, everything's gonna be all right. Well, that's great. I'm so glad I managed to get rickrolled by Chad Daybell. In a letter, no less. Thus ends the 6th letter. Actually, I think I know why I felt like he didn't sound right. I was just thinking to myself that he really starts to loosen up in that 6th letter. If you work backward from there, that suggests that his earlier letters might have been slightly more stilted and really more streamlined. That's what I'm noticing when I think back on them now. Because he was nervous. Which, given that he knew the news was going to pick this up. He knew Nate Eaton was going to talk about it. And podcasters and whatever he meant by the police department that merged with network TV or something. He was probably feeling really self-conscious. Yeah, he definitely has loosened up in this later letter. I feel like he's starting to go on some of those Chad Daybell tangents. He didn't do that at all early on. So I think he's probably getting more comfortable. I also wonder if the publicity has emboldened him, frankly. Let's move on to our final questions. First, what could we have done to make these letters better? Assuming that the goal is to drum up support for Chad from people he used to know, the problem I see is that he hasn't actually explained anything. Obviously, his intended audience is people who didn't watch the trial, but even those people are going to know certain damning facts that Chad has made no effort to explain. Why did he write Loinfire while he was still married to Tammy? Why did he marry Lori less than 2 weeks after Tammy died? Why were the kids buried in his backyard? He could have answered all of those questions in the first letter. Instead, we get this circumlocutory avoidance. It feels like he's trying to get former friends and acquaintances back on his side by arguing that he's still the same Chad they always knew. His excommunication was unfair and he's still unfaithful. And having a third of a dozen NDEs isn't weird or even unusual. And that will work on a small number of people. Anyone who follows true crime content knows that there is a portion of society that feels like thinking about and examining crime is a dirty pastime, that it's salacious and unethical. Personally, I think that segment of society is enabling criminals by pretending they don't exist. Those are the same people who will say, it doesn't matter what someone has done in the past. All that matters is who they are now. And there are some people who will say that about Chad. Some of them will also point to who he was before his crimes and claim that he's still that person, like his 6-month killing spree was just an aberration in the life of an otherwise humble, gentle, godly man, and he's repented and he's back on the path to heaven. Those people want to be reassured that Chad's crimes were random and singular and can't happen to them, and they will be reassured by these letters. There are some people who will be affected by these letters in the way Chad wants them to be. So in that sense, the letters require no improvement. To the rest of us, however, these letters are bizarre and pointless and kind of offensive. The only thing I want to hear from Chad Daybell at this point is the truth. And whatever else he may write, that's one thing I'm confident he won't include. Even 6 letters in, I'm somewhat confused about what he's attempting. Is he genuinely so obsessed with how people see him that he can't resist trying to improve their opinion of him? Does he really think he could create a groundswell of support that would change his fate? He can't possibly believe he's talented enough as a writer to write himself off of death row. Can he? After letter number 6 failed to appear on time, because Chad is claiming he's going to put out 2 a week, I thought it was likely there wouldn't be any more. I stand corrected. Part of why I thought the letters might stop is that I did notice that Emma is getting just destroyed in the comments section of the letters from Chad's Facebook page. I know people will be miffed when I say this, but I have compassion for Emma. I know. People want me to say that she's evil and deserves nothing but loathing and mockery. I'm not unaware of Emma's sins, but I'm trying to imagine being a devoted daughter who's deeply enmeshed with her father and very immature, who loves him and believes him and trusts him. And I'm imagining opening the newspaper to read about how Idaho is building a firing squad range in which to execute prisoners. She must be panicked every moment of the day. She must be sick with fear. And I think that would be emotionally wrenching even for daughters who know their fathers are guilty. I mean, imagine how much worse it is if you're still in denial about your father's guilt. And yes, obviously she should be getting help and accepting that Chad did exactly what he's been convicted of. But I do think that point of view is a bit shaded by victim blaming. Emma is a victim of Chad's too. All his kids are. And I know this because if Chad truly loved his kids, he'd tell them the truth. He'd say, I did this. I'm sorry. I screwed up my life and I screwed up your lives and I stole your mother from you. And now I have to help you prepare for my execution. Because in the words of Rick Astley in Angels on My Side, I need the people that I really love to only give me truth. Chad is manipulating Emma. He is making a fool of her. And he doesn't feel a moment of guilt about it. And Chad's not going to tell his children the truth, because he's a shit father on top of everything else. Pardon my French. I felt it was justified in this case. Regarding our second question, What have we learned about Chad from reading these letters? I would say not a whole lot. Other than that he's had another NDE in the 2 months since Lori talked to Nate Eaton, and that he likes various bands. We've mostly gotten confirmation that he's manipulative. He's manipulating Emma, and he's manipulating all the people who knew him before his crimes but didn't watch the trial. I assume his end goal is to restore that group of people's faith in him and then send them out into the world to convince others who either didn't watch the trial or haven't heard of him. And maybe then those people can talk to the governor of Idaho and get a pardon? Maybe that's the end goal? Actually, that would tell us something important. If that's the case, it would tell us that Chad, unlike Lori, isn't expecting Jesus to break him out of prison. He's not sitting back and trusting that the prisoners will go free. He's trying to make it happen. And speaking of Lori, where is she in these letters? Is she another unfortunate fact that he's going to have to spin? Or is he just going to continue to pretend she doesn't exist? I noticed something when Lori was talking to Nate Eaton about Chad. I don't really buy into body language analysis beyond what close observation and common sense can tell us, but I felt like Lori looked angry when Chad came up. I got the feeling things between her and Chad weren't good.
You told me years ago Chad was the best man you've ever met.
Chad is a very kind person, yes.
Is that still true?
Yes.
So besides his spirituality, what else attracts you to Chad?
He's a wonderful person. Everyone who knows him knows that.
I don't know. Maybe Chori is headed for divorce. If there are more letters, I will probably discuss them. Let me know if that's something you want. I realize that the fact that he's writing these and that Emma is posting them is distasteful. So if you don't want me to cover them, let me know that too. I'm sorry I've been slow lately. I'm trying to get my hormone levels straightened out, and I've just been super tired the past few weeks. As I said, I have a Visions of Glory video that only needs to be edited, and I'm nearly finished with my script covering Wendy Adelson's novel, so that will be coming out if Florida ever gets around to arresting her. Before I sign off, I want to share something, just because I think you all will find it really cool. I am delighted to have been accepted to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Citizens Academy. I can't even believe it exists. It's a 10-week class for county residents who want to learn about death investigations, forensics, toxicology, and basically what the ME's office does. We're going to look at some case studies and attend an autopsy. I'm going to learn a ton, and hopefully make some friends who are into true crime. Well, actually, that's Gosha's hope for the Citizens Academy. He says I need someone else to talk to about all of this. I attended the first session last night, and it was fascinating to learn about the process. We toured the building, and we learned what everyone does, and interviewed the autopsy assistants. Honestly, it was interesting just to see what our tax money supports. It made me feel kind of good about paying taxes, because these are people who care about the dead and care about their families, and I was glad to see it. As far as the ME's office knows, this is the only such program in the country, but I'm curious if there are other programs like this, or if this program could be an example for other counties. Ours is apparently the most accredited ME's office in the US, which I had no idea about. And this is the 8th time they've offered the Citizens Academy. So obviously, the interest is there. They received over 600 applications for 40 spaces. As part of my application, I had to make a 30-second video explaining why I should be chosen for the Academy, and I will include it at the very end of this video in case you want to laugh at me being goofy and wearing a fake goatee. As soon as the program director saw me walk in, she did this. They said to make the video fun and creative. So, yeah. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking or subscribing. Please don't reach out to anyone involved in this case, and remember to use your words wisely. Bye. Oh crap, I'm already recording. All right. And today I'm going to discuss the letters from Pridden factual inaccuracy.
Did I not include this in my script?
Maybe Emma took over and she has a heavier editing. Maybe Emma took over and she has a headier.
Did I undo my hair? I need eye drops for my throat.
But he says he only looked so bored in court. Chad isn't a defendant. So my neighbor has just started playing music outside. I don't know if you can hear that. I'm sorry if you can. I can't close the windows. My office is on the 3rd floor, and last week I discovered that the air conditioning unit that sits right next to my desk that I used to cool the room before I record was full of black mold. So that had to get hauled out of here, and the new one has not yet arrived. So I'm not closing these windows because it's 100 degrees up here. That's also why my cheeks are so red, incidentally. Where was I? Our family's favorite books have At first, did I? Yeah, I didn't do a great job of this. Alright, maybe printing these out was a mistake. I just forgot to add this entirely. Gosh darn it. I just got an Amazon delivery? What time is it? It's 2 minutes to 10. And hopefully the song helps lift your spirits. And that he's using his bookshelves. But he leaves out the part about people recall when he called... Is it Freeman or Friedman? I think it's Freeman. He links to Tammy's happened the morning. It's Freeman. Gosh darn it. Including being part of 4 different bishoprics. Points on which he feels he needs to defend himself. The deputies would put my mail addressed... Oh, that's not what that says. He says that he and Elder Hansen were allowed to attend an LDS mission wedding. An LDS mission wedding? That is a typo. Oh, crap. Not the witnesses on the stand. Oh, it's singular. Okay. It is even more obvious on paper. Oh, that should be in the present tense. Mother trucker. I'm never doing side bangs again. Usually I get all sweaty and I push them to the side and then they dry like that. That's what I should have done this time. Sweat is the key to good bangs. He's taken the direct... Yeah, I think I took this out. All right. There. And my papers are falling apart. But that's kind of the obvious. Especially when he writes that it was neat seeing what color the kids would have hair. What did I just say? And then demand a hearsay exception, but we would have one answer. Who talks like that? He says the bit about the man he took the job over for. Over for? Or is it over from? Everybody got them angels on their side. What did I say? Everybody? Who watched over to me. After 6 letters failed appeared... What? In the comments section of the Letters for Chad Facebook page. Oh crap, it's letters from Chad. Oh, I didn't remove this section. I just thought, yeah, because... Okay. Right. Where does this begin? Oh crap. I've wrecked the order. This is why you bind things, Kit. Maybe for my birthday, Gosha would get me a comb binder. Let's start over. Hi, I'm Kit, and this is my armchair. As an armchair student, I love to learn. As an armchair detective, I'll solve the case. As an armchair philosopher, I ask great questions. As an armchair clown, I'm not afraid to look like a fool. As an armchair YouTube creator, I'll be an advocate for the medical examiner's department and share what I know with the community. If you choose me for the Citizens Academy, you'll get all these armchair personas and more. Hope to see you this fall.